What really worries me today is what's going to happen to us if machines can think. And what interests me specifically is, can they?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. If you'd asked me that question just a few years ago, I'd have said it was very far-fetched. And today, I just have to admit I don't really know.
Well, if you're confused, Doctor, how do you think I feel?
This is AI for the Rest of Us, a podcast from University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Mark Earhart.
And I'm Casey Boyle.
This is a show that helps explain artificial intelligence, what it means, who it affects, and what you need to know right now.
I'm convinced that machines can and will think in our lifetime.
There is going to be all this automation. People are going to be out of work.
Computers are taking over now.
Here I am playing chess with a computer.
And then I just flick a switch on the modem and replace the receiver. I'm now waiting for the computer to answer me.
Today on AI for the Rest of Us.
We may need to rethink some of the ways that we're assessing our students so that we're not just spitting a ChatGPT generated lesson plan at them and they are spitting something back at us.
If you're going to be agile enough to stay a step ahead of where the technology is, you have to know how to learn and you have to be able to see the potential in the tools that are being created. College degrees are the things that are going to enable people to do that.
Hi, Casey.
Hey, Mark.
As you know, when we were preparing to record today's interview, surprise, I got called up for jury duty. First time I've ever been selected. So I totally missed out on this cool conversation. The topic is AI in education. How will it change the way we learn? Will chatbots replace teachers? Do we still need universities? And can you really learn from chatbots that are prone to making stuff up?
We're talking AI in education. We have two great guests today. Could you both introduce yourselves?
Hey, Art Markman, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Professor in Psychology.
KP Praco, Associate Professor of Instruction in the Department of Molecular Biosciences.
I'm going to start with you, Art. I was wondering if you can give us an overview of the different ways that professors are using AI, both at UT and perhaps across higher education.
If we look at the large language models and the image models that really came to prominence about a year and a half ago, those have been incorporated in a number of different ways across campus. So, for example, we have faculty in architecture and fine arts who are taking image-based models and playing around with them for idea generation. On the large language model side, we have faculty who are part of a partnership that we had with Grammarly to generate lesson plans for how you might use the generative capacity to teach writing in more effective ways. But then on top of that, we have several folks across campus who are working with a former student at UT to build tutors for their class. Those are just a variety of the things that are going on.
A lot of people fear in education that AI-generated material is going to give the product that we want students to create. But in your answer, you talk a lot about the process. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, the fear that people have is students are just going to type in, write me an essay on this topic. And certainly that's something a student could choose to do. But I should say up front, we revamped our honor code last year. And part of the reason that we did that was because we want to really focus on the process of learning.
Yeah.
It's not about generating an essay. It's about learning to think in ways where the essay helps you to articulate that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so there are parts to that process where AI might actually be useful.
Absolutely.
So if you're trying to generate ideas for an essay, you might ask a system to make some suggestions and then use that to then go and look for more information. So we can focus on that process. You can actually put guardrails on a number of these systems where if a student asks to do something that you don't want them to do, it can say, I can't let you do that.
KP, a couple questions for you. One is, what are ways that you're using AI in the classroom today?
Yeah, so I've experimented with ChatGPT and a few things. I had students kind of write their abstract with it or background information and see how it did, and then do some fact checking on that. But my favorite one that I've used is Research Rabbit. They claim it's like Spotify for journal articles. And so you start with a few journal articles you found, and it generates a visual network that allows you to just see the papers clearly. Different sized dots and different intensities, different colors all mean something. And then instead of being like faced with a wall of manuscripts after a word search, students have this like visual network that they can click on and explore other papers. And the closeness of the dots tells you how related they are. And so students, if they're looking for something, they can find the paper that they put in and find the web around that and see the related authors and things like that. And the AI does its magic and figures out related keywords and things and clusters papers that you may not have read and authors that you may not be familiar with.
How's it changed the teaching experience for you and the learning experience for the students?
The teaching experience, not much. I feel like I've always been kind of learning new programs, getting good at them, and then providing students with instructions and seeing where they take it. So it's just doing that with new tools. The students, some of the ChatGPT activities, they were very underwhelmed by. And they're like, why are we doing this? It took me longer to put prompts in and figure out all that. But Research Rabbit, they were very happy with. And I got this unsolicited feedback like, I'm going to use this in all my courses. What a great way to visualize the data. And it's so less overwhelming than a list of references.
Yeah. I was teaching last year, I was teaching 2 courses, one in advanced writing and one in intro to programming for humanities students, when the large language models dropped, I should say. And I was really worried about it initially with my advanced writing students. And it turned out that none of them wanted to work with it. They were in that class because they wanted to learn the craft of writing. It was my intro to programming students who I had the toughest time with. Because it's intro to programming for humanities students, a lot of the code is pretty simple. It's really about messing up and trying to get it right, that sort of thing. And these models had no problem with those assignments. So I had to, in the middle of the semester, change course and work to incorporate it. It was a quick pivot, right? What are some of the experiences of working with faculty on that sort of larger institutional level of integrating AI?
We have everything from people who have really dived in and just said, what can this new tool do? And then we have skeptics. Justifiably, right, we want to make sure that we're teaching the right kinds of core skills. And so I think the conversations have been great. I think we've managed to do both. I think we have managed to both incorporate the significant concerns people have while at the same time trying to let 1,000 flowers bloom and try to figure out how to do it. And then to use that to inform strategy at the university level.
I think it was Back to School, old Rodney Dangerfield movie, where at the start of the semester, you have everybody in this huge lecture class. And then as the semester goes on, you start seeing more and more people like drop their tape recorders off and record the professor. And by the end of the semester, the professor is playing a tape to a bunch of tape recorders. And so at the very end, there's this like whole, in the span of one semester, everyone just kind of like literally, bailed out. So if a student can just learn from AI, why bother going to college? We've seen this same kind of thing with 10 years ago when there was those massive online courses, these taped courses. I think people are having this fear and anxiety about the classroom experience or the educational experience being completely replaced, right? So what are we paying so much for college if it's just going to be AI generated or assisted or augmented? And does it devalue a college education?
No, I don't think it devalues it at all. It actually points to the need for us to really encourage critical thinking skills in our students. They're going to be confronted with information that's not real. They need to know how to fact check it. And that's what I teach my students. And I can teach them to find the good sources. And, we may need to rethink some of the ways that we're assessing our students so that we're not just spitting a ChatGPT generated lesson plan at them and they are spitting something back at us.
Right.
But, there's a lot of value in higher education and what we do.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 ways to answer this question. I mean, on the one hand, I actually think that AI tools are going to enhance college education in significant ways. So if you think about the learning outcomes for classes, there's 3 kinds of learning outcomes. There's knowledge, there's skills, and there's attitudes. And faculty often, I jokingly say that many classes end up being 3 hours of stand-up comedy a week.
Right.
And when you lecture to students, a lot of what you're giving is very knowledge heavy. Little bit of skill, but a lot of skill learning really happens by doing. And attitudes are the hardest thing to teach. With course-specific GPTs that will enable students to actually engage with reading, but then go through an exercise of having almost an individualized TA, you can actually expect a higher level of understanding on the knowledge outcomes, having students then come to class and being able to focus more on those skill and attitude outcomes. So I'm actually excited about what this is going to do to college education. And then I think it actually reinforces the role of a college education writ large. When you get a college degree, you are learning a discipline. And what any discipline does is it enables you to take complex problems, turn them into manageable problems that you can answer through the means of whatever discipline you learned. You are disciplining your thinking process. And that ability is going to be more crucial as we see these technological developments. Because one of the things that generative AI has done is it's coming for the knowledge workers.
Right.
It's the first time we've got a tool that legitimately does some of the kinds of things that we expect knowledge workers to do. Which means if you're going to be agile enough to stay a step ahead of where the technology is, you have to know how to learn.
Yep.
You have to know how to frame complex problems that haven't been solved before, and you have to be able to see the potential in the tools that are being created. College degrees are the things that are going to enable people to do that.
Right. AIs have a problem with hallucination a lot of times. Isn't there a risk that students might learn bogus information or misinformation?
Yeah, of course, there's a risk. Could I just share my first experience with hallucination?
Oh, yes, please.
So I was writing a grant. It was early 2023, and I was like, I'm just kind of having some writer's block. I had words on paper, but I'm like, is there anything I'm missing? And so I ask it to give me some information about the use of VR and molecular visualization, and I get these brilliant references. I'm like, how could I have missed all of this? And so, of course, I start digging. I'm like, what is the DOI for this paper, the document identifier? And it gives me these numbers. And I start looking, and none of it was real. And so when I've been speaking with colleagues or given just like a lunchtime talk about this, that would be my favorite thing, to make it hallucinate in that way, ask it for references that were too recent and have it do that. And recently, ChatGPT has stopped doing that. And it actually gave me instructions how to search on PubMed. So it is getting better all the time. I think these things come out and then they go back and they're like, well, let's make that better. But the hallucination is a real thing. And students just need to be able to go through that and fact check it, fact by fact, know how to parse that out. Yeah, so I think there's still a lot to teach them about the critical thinking skills.
Yeah, and you're very brave to share your first experience with hallucination to a podcast. I'm going to skip that because it was well before ChatGPT. I'm kidding. But there are things that the models do well and things that they don't do so well. And the place where they do well is when there is a reference text or reference database that they can draw from. And there's a part of the techniques with large language models are statistical. They're making use of the statistical interconnections among words to generate text. But in addition to that, there's another process that's put on these that's called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And what that does is to take a particular database and focus the text that is being generated on that database. And that's actually a reasonably good cure for a lot of hallucinations. So knowing where the information came from is also really important.
The sort of metaphor, the operating metaphor for a lot of these AI systems is the chat metaphor. It's very easy. It's a help desk kind of situation, right? And I'm starting to see this being implemented on reading platforms, for instance, on individual PDFs, a chat feature where you can ask a individual article questions, right? Is there something to be gained or lost with that sort of ease, that the chat and the chatter metaphor, to be interacting with these platforms that we're trying to get students to read and learn?
Yeah, I've worked with some of the paper summary bots. And, you can go in, and I think for like a keyword that you don't know, clicking on it, getting a definition, it's really great. The summaries of summarize the method section, that's always been a little underwhelming. It's mostly a rephrase.
Yeah.
It's not going with that deeper level of learning yet.
Right.
So I've been underwhelmed by these types of things, but I think they do have a lot of potential to simplify things.
Yeah, which is a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, so part of what students need to learn is they are reaching a phase of life in which they are actually expected to be experts at something. If you go through a curriculum, you should know more about that topic that you studied than most people on Earth.
Right.
And part of developing that expertise is becoming responsible for the details of things. And so, the danger is if people get used to summarizing things, they will learn the summary of things. They'll become glib, but they won't really become expert. And so, those kinds of features, they're easy to use, but we have to really begin to teach, when is it a good idea just to get the 50,000-foot view of this? And when should we actually put that to the side and make ourselves responsible for the details?
Another question. This one is from our co-host, Mark, who couldn't make it today, but he says that he wasn't the best college student. He was often too shy to ask questions in class or even go to office hours. He was always afraid of looking dumb. He wonders how his experience might be different if he had a sort of AI-powered learning assistant. He talked a little bit about tutors, perhaps, but what about that student who feels they just don't know enough to ask?
Yeah, and chatbots are just a great way to even identify the terminology you don't know and begin to talk about a subject, begin to find the keyword you want to put into Google. So I think that's a good entry, but you also risk embarrassment on another level when, it's sounding so sincere and you start to believe this, AI as an authority, and then you go to class and you're confident in these details that are not accurate. So it's a tough one.
I mean, I think as we begin to build out some of these AI tutors that are using some of these techniques to ensure that the content is probably reasonably accurate, this is going to be really helpful for those students who might otherwise avoid talking to the faculty member or to a TA to get help. You can build these systems in ways that give them personalities.
Right.
And it might be interesting, actually, to take these tutors and then actually give students an opportunity to customize the personality of it so that when they're interacting with it, it's interacting with them in a way that is compatible with how they would like to interact. So some people might want somebody who's very nurturing,
right,
whereas others might want somebody who's really, being a little bit more stern.
Like an old school football coach or something, right? Yeah.
And so that might actually make the experience a little bit more enjoyable.
I hope that gives students, though, the confidence to go out there and then seek help from people because they built this confidence. Because your customized chatbot, not everybody in the world is going to speak like that to you.
Right.
And so
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of what we've talked about today revolves around AI opening up opportunities to further kind of invest in our traditional learning strategies, disciplines, exercises, critical thinking, looking at things in a sort of global, but then also a micro scale, right? But given the potential for AI to change so much about our society, the way we work and live, should universities be teaching students some other skill that we haven't talked about yet?
Computer literacy should be more a part of the curriculum for every student. The basic computer literacy, AI literacy will let you know what you're dealing with as these things take off and give you that critical perspective that you need. So I think we all need basic computer understanding.
I would agree. I mean, I think that teaching some of those things in order to make the tool something that is understandable and doesn't just feel like magic is, I think, going to be really crucial for helping to understand how they're going to be incorporated, what you should and shouldn't do with them. And these tools are going to advance. There are other AI techniques that are more sort of reasoning based that eventually are going to get hooked up to these large language models in ways that are going to create yet another level of sophistication of what the models are able to do. Understanding what the potential is that's out there and understanding when that is being incorporated into the models will be really crucial for keeping up with what the systems can do.
And whose job do you think it's going to be to teach that?
It's going to be who specific, like which person? I mean, I think
KP, it's your job.
No, I mean,
is it the educator who's dabbling with these in the classroom? Do we have to present enough background to our students, or do we just try these things and? Where do they get that?
Well, I think we're going to need to share our expertise across the university and make sure that that all of us are staying current for how this affects the disciplines that we teach. And I think that like every other tool that we all have to teach in our disciplines, we're going to have to make sure that students are aware that in the context of what we're teaching, this is how these tools can be used. just as we had enough expertise to know what the tools would and wouldn't do for students before, we're going to have that same level of expertise now.
Yeah, I had to ask that because I know faculty want to use these in their classroom and remain cutting edge, but they're nervous about the way that they can present it as well.
And we should use that nervousness, because one of the things that happens in classes is, we set ourselves up as experts all the time because we are experts in our particular field. And yet we have to recognize that there's also a bunch of stuff we don't know anything about. And sometimes it's kind of cool to come into class and say, hey, I'm playing with this thing and I'm still learning about it. And I'm a little bit clueless. And here's a mistake I made. So I love the hallucination story you told precisely for that, because I think actually students need to hear that, yeah, I did this thing and unexpectedly this is what happened. And I didn't catch it until I really started digging in further.
Yeah, it's important to demonstrate how to learn.
Yeah.
And you don't do that just by demonstrating that you have learned all the time, right?
Right.
And if you come in the class saying, I don't know how this works, and you involve them in figuring it out or just going through the beautiful mistake you made, right?
Yeah.
That's a great learning opportunity.
I will say, right, a formative experience for me as an undergraduate was, I used to panic going to see faculty members. I literally could not catch my breath.
Yeah, same.
Going to talk to professors when I was an undergraduate. And I remember in my junior year actually taking a course in artificial intelligence. And I remember saying something to the professor, and he sort of leaned back in his chair and he looked up in the air for a second. And then he gave me an answer. And I was like, oh, wow, I made him think about something. And it was at that moment that I began to realize, oh, yeah, there's this whole progression that you go through in anything where you start by not knowing anything about it, and then you know more about it, and then and at some point you actually can begin to talk to people almost at the level that they're at, and then eventually at the level that they're at, and that those people who sit across the desk from you, they started where you were, and they're just further along in that journey. And it was that moment really when that crystallized, and I feel like, I just happened to be lucky that I ended up in that conversation and had that insight, but I think we can teach that more. I think we can help people to realize, you're just on at a different point in your intellectual journey than the people who are in front of the classroom, but we're all on that journey. And in some ways, we're all exactly where you are in the stuff that we don't know much about yet.
I love this, leveraging our shared experience.
Yeah.
Sticking with not knowing for a second, what do you not know about AI that you hope to know a year or so from now?
What I don't know about AI that I wish I could know is really how it is going to change jobs and how much it's going to impact the future and in what ways. I find myself looking for okay, what jobs have been replaced by AI today so I could better inform my students. But it's not a lot. It's very specific areas. And it's just there's so many unknowns. And I really still think teaching students the critical thinking skills to get them to move forward in this as things change is just going to be the best I can do.
I don't know exactly what we need to be teaching about AI yet. I was an early adopter of the web. So in 1995, I put my syllabus online. I was teaching at Columbia at the time. I had to program the whole website in HTML, including finding the little 6-digit code for powder blue, for Columbia's powder blue for the background of the website. And then I brought it to class and I told the students on the first day of class, your syllabus is on the web. And I said, how many of you need a help session on how to use the current web browser, Netscape, Navigator? And almost everyone in class came to the help session that I ran. And the following semester, 30% of the students came. And then the semester after that, I did it again. I said, who needs a help session? And the students looked at me like, who needs help breathing? And so what I took away from that experience is, AI, these large language models and image systems, they're just going to become more and more a part of everybody's life. It is a transitional phase where we have to get people to learn how to use them in a basic way. And things like prompt engineering are not the thing we need to be teaching, because for one thing, I think a lot of that's going to get built into the way the systems function. And for another, it's just going to become built into so many of the tools that we use that a lot of those skills are going to become second nature. What we really need to figure out is what are we going to need to teach in order to help people to think in the ways that we want them to think by virtue of going through the curricula that we've created. And it's by no means clear what that's going to look like.
Art, KP, thank you so much for joining today. We look forward to seeing what you all are working on over the course of next year, and we'll be talking to you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
That's our show. Next time on AI for the Rest of Us.
I think we need to be starting from this question, which is which parts of your job are meaningful to you and which parts of your job do you want automated?
If you think about a physician or a judge or an executive making decisions, there are a lot of opportunities for AI to make those decisions better, more fair, if we do it right. And it's not as straightforward as some of us have assumed earlier on.
AI for the Rest of Us is a production of the University of Texas at Austin's College of Natural Sciences and College of Liberal Arts. Our show is part of the university's Year of AI. To learn more, visit yearofai.utexas.edu.
For links and more resources on today's topic, go to aifortherest.net.
Big thanks today to our guests KP Procco and Art Markman. Our executive producers are Christine Sinatra and Dan Oppenheimer. Sound design and audio editing by Robert Scaramuccia. Our theme music is by Aiolos Rue. Our interviews are recorded by the trusty audio engineers at the Liberal Arts ITS Recording Studio.
Thanks for listening.